This is Joshua Treviño, and you're watching the Break It Down show with Pete Turner.
How fun is this? I love it, man. I love it.
Good to see you.
We I've been chasing you forever, and you're always so busy, and you're wonderful for coming on the show, and I just appreciate it. And I got to start the show by just saying how much I love you, and I love being your friend, and I love how you write, and I love the things that you work on. And we're in this group called the Plaza, and everybody, I'll put the link for how you can read work that comes from Josh and the Plaza here in a second. But yeah, thanks for coming on the show.
Yeah, well, I reciprocate the sentiments in full. You and I have entered foreign lands together, albeit just for lunch, but nevertheless.
And once sort of quasi illegally, possibly, maybe. Who knows?
Yes, very much illegally. Yeah, I'll let you direct where we want to talk about the show, but we have accidentally crossed into Mexico on occasion. So
This is a true accident. Yeah. So when people talk about crossing the Rio Grande, what they don't realize is how different that can be between this mile of the Rio Grande and then the next mile of the Rio Grande.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. Yeah, it's one thing that I who pride myself on border knowledge actually had a tremendous gap of ignorance revealed. Pete and I, this is 2 summers ago, we were out in kind of the wilds of Presidio County, Texas. There's a point where FM 170 turns into a dirt path, and it is truly remote country. And I knew there was a defunct federal border crossing somewhere adjacent to the settlement. I can't even call it a town of Candelaria. And we hopped a ditch en route to try to find it, and walked about a quarter mile and saw the town of San Antonio del Bravo in the distance, which I knew was in Mexico. And we realized that ditch that we literally leapt over was the dry bed of the Rio Grande. So there we were.
Yeah, it's wild. You talk often about these little border towns, and a friend of ours, Xander Bullock, and I were talking about when are you from somewhere, right? You have some of your family roots go back to Texas as far back as they could possibly go.
Yeah.
When do you belong to some place?
Oh man, that is a great question, and it's one that I've thought about a lot. And just to give context for why I've thought about it, you're right. My father's family in Texas goes back almost 300 years at this point. So we're descended from the original settlers, colonizers of Nuevo Santander, as it was at the time, under Jose de Escandon in the 1750s. The man who founded Laredo, Thomas Sanchez, is a direct ancestor of mine, among many others. Of course, in Laredo, that gets you nothing, right? Free salsa at Taco Palenque, which is the same thing non-descendants get. So it means it's effectively meaningless. But yeah, really, really, really deep roots. And on my mom's side, it's not as deep. So she's the descendant of really post-Civil War Southerners who came looking for new life and new fields in East Texas. But for all these roots, and Texans love talking about their roots. I wasn't raised here. We were a military family. Pete, you and I have talked a little bit about that. My father was in the Air Force, and so the places, although Texas was always a fixed point for me in terms of where family is and where we were from, and kind of. My dad did a great job of making it known that we were Texans. We rooted for the Dallas Cowboys, which in the late 1980s was a good character development exercise, especially when they're going 1-15. Houston Texan fans now get to live that nightmare. But I grew up in Korea, in Washington D.C., and in Florida predominantly, and I didn't move back to Texas until I was 35 years old. And so, can I say I'm from Texas? Are you from a place when you didn't grow up there? Adding to the complication is the question of my two sons, both of whom are adopted from China and are now being raised in Texas. Are they Texan?
Right.
And kind of what I've come to is, this idea, and I don't dismiss the utility and the necessity of roots. I've never been, and I never will be, and I'm increasingly less of an advocate for sort of this rootless cosmopolitanism. The sort of homogenized cities around the world. Place is very important, and roots are very important. But ultimately, I think you're from a place and you belong to a place when you choose it, and it chooses you to some extent. One of the most famous Texans in history was Texan for only about 30 days. He died in a workplace incident, actually, Davy Crockett. But he. We remember him as one of the greatest Texans. I mean, the man was here for just over 4 weeks, and
Right.
but he made that choice to the uttermost, really. And in a real sense, you are who you choose from. I want to close on this, and I'll let you get a word in edgewise. Sorry. I recognize this is a very American concept. If I move to Korea or Taiwan or Japan, and chose those places, which has actually been a topic of conversation in my household because we have Asian kids. I could choose Korea all I wanted. I could choose Taiwan all I wanted. It would never choose me back. I would never be Taiwanese. And so the ability to do something like this is something pretty unique to sort of this new world ethic. And man, we're lucky to be part of it. Honestly, I'm grateful that I could choose to be. I was born Texan. I'm grateful that I could re-choose it as an adult and
Love it.
Be part of it today.
There's another side to this equation, and it's the acceptance that you are from this thing, right? So, are you a Texan to Texas, to Texans? And so, my buddy Dave is a similar example. It's great that you brought up the, going to Korea. My buddy Dave is Hawaiian Japanese by descent, but if he goes to Japan, he is an American. He is absolutely not Japanese. He's experienced the racism of not being Japanese. It might be easy to say, Pete, you're a Caucasian. I promise I am not from Asia. I'm from California. If I went to, I don't know, Armenia or Georgia, I wouldn't be welcomed. And I don't know that my DNA says that I've ever been there in that area, right? So I'm actually not from there, but that is, and look, I'm not complaining about this. I'm illustrating an example. That's cast upon me. You're Caucasian. Well, those words mean something.
Yeah.
And how much does someone else have a say, or some group have a say in who you are? Well, I would say a pretty substantial amount of who you are is determined by your peers around you.
It's interesting. One of the examples from American history that comes to mind is the question of the political allegiance and identity of African Americans in the 19th century. There was this idea, and I'm going to oversimplify the history here, but one of the ideas that was very current in the middle of the 19th century and included adherents among Abraham Lincoln was that if you ever had emancipation of enslaved Americans, that they would never be part of the body politic. They're not really of here. They're not from here. And one of the viable options is actually to send them back to Africa. Now, saying send them back is as was rightly pointed out, a misnomer, because none of these individuals by the middle of the 19th century had actually been born in Africa. Let me rephrase that. Some had, the overwhelming majority had not. And so, Frederick Douglass is probably the foremost, or I guess best known advocate of this, but not just him. But Frederick Douglass and men like him, took pains to point out that, when emancipation came, it was an emancipation of a specifically American population. And so you had this, really post Civil War, this almost 100-year struggle of getting to exactly what you're talking about, Pete, which is, does the rest of the country say yes, yes, one of us, effectively? And that is such a fraught question. I have to think that there's really only two paths to societal survival when you look at world history writ large. You either make it very easy to say yes, one of us, or you make it nearly impossible. And one's the hermetic solution, and the other is the open solution. As Americans, I think we rightly have chosen the open solution. But it's one of the great driving questions of the human condition in history. The Romans dealt with it, so
the Romans definitely dealt with that. Yeah,
they did.
I saw Bono recently live. He was doing his book tour, and it's just fantastic. Whenever he does his thing, it's an all-encompassing artistic expression of what he does. And one of the things he closes on, he says the words, "America is a psalm." P.S. Psalm, right? Okay. And you think, gosh, you know what? There is something to that, especially the way he describes it. And I wonder, because Texas is so individual, is Texas a psalm?
That's the kind of gnomic quasi-Christian utterance that Bono is given to, and I actually don't know what he means by saying America is a psalm. Maybe he means it in like the Carl Sandburg sense that America is a poem or America is. I don't know. Whatever America is, whatever metaphor you want to use, whether it's a psalm or a limerick, for accessible to people like me. I think whatever America is, Texas is more of it. And it's one point that I make a lot in my talks around Texas, is that we Texans were proud of our understanding of ourselves as distinct and unique. And T.R. Fehrenbach talks about Texas as kind of the Scotland of America, which is a nation within the nation. And I think all of that's true. However, it has to come with an asterisk, and we can't forget this, that Texas is best understood as a fulfillment of the United States within a particular context. And in the Texas context, it's really a context of warfare and tremendous struggle. There's really two foundational documents for Texas, and it's not the Republic's Constitution. One foundational document is Travis's letter from the Alamo, and the other foundational document is the Texas Declaration of Independence, both of which invoke the example of the United States. Travis's letter begins to the people of Texas and all Americans in the world. And then in the Texas Declaration of Independence, there's actually a clause that asserts that the Texans are rebelling against Mexico. This is almost verbatim. In order to reclaim the liberties to which we were accustomed in the land of our birth, the United States of America. And it's that idea, that specifically American idea, that finds its fulfillment in Texas. So if Bono thinks America is a psalm, then he probably thinks Texas is a psalm as well. But hopefully he thinks it's the best psalm out of all of them.
When I think of America as a psalm and possibly Texas as a psalm, and I do agree, I think Texas is a psalm. I think it's a leaf in the book of Psalms. It's not the book of Psalms, but it's yeah, that's what it is, right? And so there's one on America, there's one on freedom, and there's one on all these different things. And so what book is that then? It's not the Bible, because that's a different chapter. But what is the binding around the book of Psalm that has the U.S. and Texas and freedom in it? Getting a little esoteric.
Yeah. This is I'm not sure how to answer this slowly. In the Texas case, the argument that I've made, and Armas subscribers will have seen this already. It's this idea of this. It's this concept of the struggle plus the idea. There's a T.R. Fehrenbach passage that Rick Perry was fond of quoting back when he was running for president in the 2012 cycle, about Texas and Israel being very like each other. That Texas is sort of this most European of the American states, because kind of there's this blood and soil ethic to it, and Israel, the state of Israel, is the closest thing in the modern day. And I think there's something to that, but I don't think Fehrenbach had it all. There's a lot of blood and soil places out there. There's villages in the Guatemalan highlands right now that are blood and soil places, and they don't, people aren't trying to move there, nor do they have the kind of the open attractiveness. The added element with Texas, which really was born, I mean, we have to understand, an extraordinary violence, and most of the United States can't claim that, right? Like when you think of states in the U.S. that were won by genuine kind of mass violence, it's not a long list. It's the 13 colonies. You can argue about whether Vermont was part of that. Maybe Florida, although modern Florida really is not contiguous with its historical origins. Parts of the plains, although that's more government action than kind of a frontier settling piece. So like this war of peoples that happens is limited to the eastern seaboard, and Texas. Hawaiians might have an argument, but I think they're wrong. But it's really that. And Texas is not sanctified by that violence. The violence is shaping, and it's contextual, and it provides meaning. But what provides it with virtuous meaning is the idea, is this American idea. And I think that to kind of get around to your question, like that's the binding that holds us together. If anyone ever goes to the Texas state capitol, and there's a lot to see there, take the time to go to the north entrance of the Texas state capitol, because there's a very interesting bronze plaque on the interior side next to the exit, and it's a list of Texans who fought in the American Revolution and are buried in Texas, which is absolutely incredible when you think about it. I mean, the two events are separated by almost 70 years. 65-ish, depending on how you want to count it. And so first of all, these are exceptionally long-lived people. But the other part of it is that if you fought in the Revolution, you were of military age in the Revolution, which admittedly starts at 13, 14, depending on the context of where you were, and given kind of the settler stock of the original Texians, these are likely South Carolinians, would be my guess. So young men who experienced partisan and guerrilla warfare in their youth, and then end up in Texas as an adult male in Texas, even if you were in your 70s or 80s, as these individuals probably were, there is a very, very strong chance, given the nature of the course of the Texas Revolution, that you, at minimum, were in a militia unit. And you 100% for sure participated in the runaway scrape when Santa Anna drove the entire civil population out of Texas. So these are individuals whose lives were bookended by existential violence, warfare that to them was in the service of human liberty as they understood it. And first of all, what a blessing to experience that. But secondly, what an illustration of the fundamental quality of the American idea in Texas, and that's what makes us us, I think. And anyway, I could go on for hours on this, which is probably what you expected anyway on the show, else you wouldn't have invited me. But that's I'll stop there.
But there's a lot of things to jump off of in there. So one of the things I'll say is, I think it's about, and I'm reaching here, I think it's about 5 minutes into Rio Bravo, John Wayne has assassinated a guy that he had, or murdered a guy that he had a land dispute over. And then he launches forward into this big Texas, story. So it is that kind of a place. And I guess I'm going to go this way first. When we look at the history, so I've been reading Benjamin Netanyahu's latest book, right? And he talks about the history of Israel. And when you go and you wind the clock back and you look at like who actually belongs to that place, his argument is it's the Jews. Like, this is our land. It's been our land whenever we've been here. It's prospered. We planted trees. He keeps talking about planting orange trees and improving it. Now, of course, there's going to be the other side, like, it's like sorting out the history of the former Yugoslavian states, the Balkans, and deciding who owned what. And
Right.
if you go back in 50-year increments, the shape of each nation is going to change all the time. And so these histories are very challenging if you don't bother to get into it. And you and I have talked about history quite a bit, the contextualization of history, understanding there's competing histories going on, all of these different things. And you look at, I just had Andres Rencendez on the show talking about Cabeza de Vaca, right? He
Oh
walks
yeah.
across what would become Texas and would become Mexico naked as a faith healer with his friends. But it wasn't Texas and Mexico then. And it really, in a lot of ways, it wasn't anything. It was just this land that had tribes on them, but these people they were a nation of people, but they didn't own land like that. You couldn't say, oh, he was walking through Arapaho. You would say he encountered these people, right? So it's a different thing. What are your thoughts on history and how all these things work together? It's a lot there, man.
Asking the small questions, aren't you?
Yeah, the little baby ones. Yeah.
Which one? Well, I think it's worth understanding that there's different when you look at history unfolding. I mean, there's different types of political structures, right? I mean, politics writ large, right? Politics is, kind of classically understood, the community of people who have an interest in their continuation as a community, really, and that takes a lot of different forms. And you're right. By the time Cabeza de Vaca is wandering through the American, becomes the American Southeast and ends up entering modern Texas, pre-modern Texas, and then ends up back at the Viceroyalty of New Spain, which is an epic trek. And no part of it, until the very end, does he enter into a state as understood by any. I mean, the Westphalian system was still 100 years in the future, but even in 16th century Europe, you started to see the kind of the evolution of that, and the Spanish, even of Cabeza de Vaca's time, actually had a pretty sophisticated understanding of the rights of man. There were these debates in Salamanca, and De la Casas, kind of spurred a lot of this conversation. So at no point did they walk through any territory that they would have recognized as not possessing rights-bearing individuals. I think that's important to say. And it distinguishes the Spanish from the English, by the way. Throughout most. I mean, there's a reason that indigenous populations survive in places like Mexico, Peru, Bolivia, and so on, and have a major role in the life of the nations. And in English-speaking North America, they've almost been reduced to political irrelevance. That's all rooted in concepts that are 400 or 500 years old. But we do have to understand that there is a fluidity to human action, and we should not, when we think about history, we should do so with a sense of historical empathy, and not in the vein of excusing any injustices that were done, but in the vein of understanding why things happen. It's always the imperative. Why did something happen? What is the explanation for something like this? And I also think, I don't know if this is a majoritarian view among historians, but we always have an obligation to try. It's not always possible, but to try to seek the charitable explanation for why things happen. People do things within history out of a sense of self-preservation, or out of a sense of imperatives that may seem preposterous to us, or even wholly unjustifiable. And yet they were done at the time because they were entirely plausible and eminently justifiable. And so to seek out those reasons is not just a pathway. To me, this is kind of the value of studying history in general, is not just a pathway to understanding history, but that skill set, as you develop it, enables you to interact with humanity and your fellow man now, and understand events now, which is, now is the only place we live. And that's the fruits of that inquiry. I may have gone way far afield from your original question, but
I'm fine with that, because I'm going to keep going far afield and asking teeny tiny questions.
go ahead.
So one of the things Rich Leday and I have written about is our general disregard for religion, and when we go abroad to go stabilize a place,
Right.
and we disregard religion so much we don't even consider the fact that, and this is partially like on your point you were talking about, it depends on who shows up to colonize or to explore. So is it a Catholic? Is it a Protestant? Is it Dutch funded money, or is it funded by the Crown of Spain? All these different things are important to the person who's receiving this guest from afar, right? So
Right.
how the Protestants approach this, or how Episcopalians specifically, or Presbyterians, and how they encounter the natives, also impacts how that region is cultivated, I guess we'll say, for lack of a better term. The other thing I want to layer in on top of this is, as we all sort this out, right? And so people move from Florida to Texas or wherever they're coming from.
Mhm.
There's all these, again, all these competing histories, right? Where, some of us will believe that the founding of the nation is in 1619 because that's when the slaves showed up. Like, hey, big surprise, slaves have been around for as long as there's been people, and so that premise is false. Is the first Thanksgiving in Texas, somewhere near Amarillo? Is it in St. Augustine, Florida, or is it out in Virginia somewhere? Like, where is the first Thanksgiving? There's all these competition for what actually happened, and a complete lack of knowledge of people who have very hard opinions. They don't even have the understanding of what actually, how this thing came about and how hard it was to even survive. So you have this, what religion, what people show up, and like all these different competing histories. How do we sort this out in a way that we can start moving forward to make plans for the future and be a better version of what we are, make a more perfect union?
Yeah, I mean, look, there's got to be a common civics, and that's one of the things that's being adjudicated right now, for better and worse, in the United States. No polity is going to survive without a common civics, and the kind of these common objects of reverence that we all
Mm.
hold in common to be dear. And throughout, I would say that throughout most of American history, we had those. Now those objects changed over time a bit, but there was always a constant core. I think what's quite dangerous about this moment now is that we really don't have the common civics, and there isn't even a common vocabulary or understanding to even be able to discuss events in the past. The
Mm.
Civil War is example number one of it, but it's not just the Civil War. It's almost any defining act of American history, whether it's the Revolution, or Vietnam, or fill in the blank at this point, to even begin to approach these
Mm.
topics without the assumption of a common language and a common frame of reference is simply impossible. There's a really, really excellent historian up at the University of Dallas by the name of Susan Hansen. I have emailed with her one time, so I can't even really claim she's an acquaintance, but I love her work. She's just she was one of those individuals who you meet and you realize you're in the presence of true brilliance. And UD is such a great school anyway. So I had lunch with her at a work event, and I was just blown away by the power of her intellect. And so I've become this consumer of like Susan Hansen lectures on YouTube.
Mm.
I say that as a fan, not a crazy person, but she's talking about, but she gives these great lectures on kind of the Addams family. She did this big study of Henry Adams. And then she had this one lecture that really, to me was extremely clarifying. And I don't recall what the topic was, but in the lecture, so I say all this as preface. I'm stealing this from Susan Hansen, but I'm stealing it because I love it, which is how the synthesis of culture and learning happens. And she talked about what George Washington did after the end of the French and Indian War, a war which he accidentally started, by the way, which then
Oops. Yeah.
spirals into pan-European conflict. But how's that for your LinkedIn page?
Yeah.
Accidentally start literally the First World War. Washington, according to her, and I don't know what her sources are, but I'm sure she's right. Washington places an order for goods coming out of England. So keep in mind, he's back from the war. I believe he's a colonel at this point, and he's expecting, I forget what the year is, 1756, let's say, for the sake of argument. But Washington thinks that his epic is done, and the rest of his life is going to be genteel farming in Virginia. Basically, he's going to manage the plantation. So,
boy, was he wrong.
Oh, if you only knew. Yes. And so what he does is he places his order for a bunch of goods from London that are supposed to shape the household that he's building. So he orders a bunch of books, and then he orders a single statue, and it's a copy of a statue by, I think, Bernini. It's called the Pius Aeneas. And it's incredibly interesting. I have to admit that I'd never heard of it before, nor have I read the Aeneid, which is another gap in my knowledge. But so viewers,
shame on you.
I know, right? It's a bit. I've been reading Davy Crockett for Kids instead. But apparently, when Aeneas flees burning Troy, like the Aeneid is Aeneas fleeing Troy, and then he has these adventures and ends up founding the city of Rome. Right? It's sort of this Roman foundational ethic, and Virgil writes it to connect Roman legitimacy claims to what even then is viewed as kind of the culture of the Mediterranean, which is classical Greece. And so when Aeneas is fleeing Troy, and this is what the statue is that Washington orders, it's Aeneas, who is a grown man, and in one hand he has he's holding the hand of his young son. So his son is 5-6 years old. He's holding the hand of his young son. In his other arm, he is holding his aged father. He's got his aged father over his shoulder. He's carrying his aged father with one arm, holding his other. And then his aged father, is actually holding the box that contains the ashes of the ancestors and the idols of the household gods. And that's the Pius Aeneas. It's called the Pius because what Aeneas is doing is, in that moment, in this statue, he's defending everything worth defending. That this is what a virtuous man does. He defends the future of his polis, his community, by taking his son. He's defending his family, clearly. He's defending the past by preserving his father, and he's defending the gods and the ancestors with his father's carrying of the ashes. So tradition, community, continuity, family. Aeneas is the defender of it all, and this is what a virtuous man does. By the way, there's no women in the Pius Aeneas. Like he's not taking his wife or any of that, which is, I suppose, another subtext of kind of how the Latins viewed things. So Washington orders this. Anyway, this is all getting back to what I'm saying. Right now, in 2022, soon to be 2023 America, I'm not sure you could make the argument that that's a picture of virtue. It's not even clear to me that it would be immediately recognized in an age where we feel free to pull down, monuments and statuary and erase the names of individuals who, whatever we may want to think of them, fought for their communities, which used to be intrinsically virtuous in the public in the public eye. And if we don't have that, if we can't look at the figure of Pius Aeneas and recognize that is a citizen's duty, that's the duty of a man, that's the duty of anyone who's part of a community, then I think we're on very perilous ground. We're on exceptionally fragile ground. And if there's not an understanding of why we should honor what came before, not in a mindless sense of reverence, but in the spirit of understanding that it was necessary to get to where we are now to create the tomorrow that we want, whatever that may be. Then I think what follows next is dissolution. And I'm still an optimist over the long run, but in the short run, I think there's terrific danger, and we have to be alert to it.
Every era has to have its struggle too, and I would say our government is built to be the rolling gunfight all the time because most of us are wrong about most things if we make these big policy changes, right? And so we have to suss out, what we're going to do next. It doesn't yield the best results, but it's that standard Churchill thing. It's the best of the worst options. It's just a thing that we have to go through. And so when we look at what comes up next and how we deal with the here and now and how we sort out, look, I'm going to post this later on, but I maybe I won't. I don't know because I don't want to be a jerk all the time. But I was in Canada, in Vancouver, up in their little Space Needle like thing with the rotating. I love a rotating restaurant because there's a 70s cheese element to it that I vibe off of. And when you enter this observation deck of this building, there's a whole acknowledgement of Native Americans. And Canada maybe does Native American things better than us. They say, First Nation people instead of like just the term Native American is kind of bass backwards because Amerigo is just the name that some map maker picked and it's stuck. And it's like now you've got an Italian guy's name and the origin of who you are with Native American. It gets all crazy.
Right.
And we have this performative sticker literally painted on the wall or stuck to the wall that somehow absolves us or performs this thing instead of doing the hard work of understanding who was here before us and how we deal with it. And I think that's an illustration in general of how we treat a lot of these very complex problems as we try to argue and suss out, how do we become a better place? How do we be, look, and this is the thing I'm always asking, how do you balance the fact that diversity and unity are antonyms and they fight? And we know through human nature that trust is going to be easier to obtain from things that we know. So unity is a lot easier to have trust in that. So it's great to be in the middle of that spectrum somewhere, but you can't be too far either way towards unity or diversity because that's just not what we do here in America.
They don't. Well, I mean, here's the thing: they don't have to be antonyms. There's nothing inevitable. A heterogeneous society may be one in which it's more difficult to create unity, but there are examples of success of exactly those societies in history. We talked about Rome before. I would argue that the old Habsburg realms, which is kind of a hobby horse of mine, actually did a surprisingly good job in a European context of doing that. Certainly better than the Russians. And then there's the United States itself. And so what matters ultimately is whether we adhere to a common story and a common narrative. And if you can create and promulgate a narrative that does tend to that conclusion, to that commonality, then I think you have a long-term chance of success. It's interesting that you mentioned the native, kind of like the land acknowledgements that get really popular, mostly among upper-income Anglos who want to demonstrate personal virtue. I mean, nobody else really cares about that stuff. But there's, one of the things in Texas is that, my Spanish ancestors were here before many of the Comanche were. And so one of the questions I've asked is if we're going to do land acknowledgements, and can we acknowledge that this territory is properly, properly the realm of His Majesty King Felipe of Spain, and that never goes over, but it illuminates the point, which is that it is a virtue signaling particularism rather than a candid engagement with history as it actually is. We just have an obligation to do better. One thing on this common story that I mention every 4th of July. If you're on Twitter, you've seen this. By the way, if you're on Twitter, get off as quickly as you can, because it's bad for your brain. But on Twitter, every July 4th, you will see the spate. I think you and I may have talked about the spate.
We have absolutely talked about this.
Yeah, you'll see the spate of kind of pompous lefties tweeting out quotes from Frederick Douglass's 1852 speech, "What to the slave is the 4th of July?" It is a great speech. It's actually it's I wouldn't say it's a foundational American text, but it's pretty close. It's way up there in the American canon. And it's always clear every time they tweet it out that they've never read the whole speech, because the
That's
way
right.
the speech is structured, I know you've read it, Pete.
No.
The way the speech is structured is that the first four-fifths of it are an indictment of the hypocrisy of the United States of America, its failure to live up to its founding ideals. And all of it's actually accurate. 1852 is a bad time to be a black man in the United States. But if you read the final 20% of it, which nobody ever gets to, Douglas's genius, his political genius and his rhetorical genius, turns it around. And he calls America to be its best self, which is actually rooted in the American founding in Douglas's vision. He describes the Constitution, properly understood, as a glorious liberty document. Interestingly enough, when you see it transcribed, those words are always capitalized, glorious liberty document, because that's the emphasis that he wanted to give to it. That's an example of a common story candidly reaching a population that had no real reason to accept it. Frankly, I mean, if you've been enslaved for generations, it's tough to accept the proposition that this is a good thing, and yet they did, and yet Douglas did, and yet there were black men fighting in the Rhode Island regiments in the Revolution, and yet British soldiers at Lexington and Concord were surprised to see African Americans joining the colonists in fighting them down the battle road, and yet, and it is that and yet that ought to, in the modern day, give us pause and say, what made it happen? It was the story, it was the idea, it was the narrative that gave people something to purchase into.
Yeah, that's great, man. I love that. It's also curious that it's hard to find the full text of that speech. It's usually posted as just that one little segment, and you're like, that's a piece of it. Let's get the whole thing.
Hmm.
And then you have to do some reading because it's in a different language. It's a bit foreign. So you really have to go through and and then some of the context that's in there that you have to read. It takes some deliberate reading to read through that. And if you're not skilled, it's like reading Shakespeare for the first time. You read it and you're like, I read all the words. They're all English words, but I didn't get the magic that comes out of that. And I think that's one of the problems with Douglas, is that he's starting to become unattainable if you're not willing to sit down and do some rigorous work.
Yeah, yeah, fully agree, fully agree. And that's true of uh, a lot of documents and rhetoric prior to about 1930 or 40. Really,
Yeah.
this kind of concept of rhetoric as an argument that you present to the public is lost. It's not that anymore, and frankly, I think it's a pity. It really is.
It is a pity. I hate to say the words dumb down, because we don't dumb down, but we have to speak where the audience is capable of listening. And unfortunately, that's at a level that would make Cicero have to dumb down what he was saying, and he's one of the best rhetoric speakers ever. Anyhow, let's get past. I'm gonna get back to Texas.
Sure.
So, what is the mission of the foundation? I want to pull up the link here so you guys can check out and you can go and see what these folks are doing. But what is your guys' mission?
I have been very, very privileged to be affiliated with, for over a decade now, the Texas Public Policy Foundation here in Austin, Texas. All credit for its excellence goes to others, not to me. So I'm a willing participant in things that have been built by individuals like Brooke Rollins, Kevin Roberts, both of whom now head. Brooke went to the White House and now heads the America First Policy Institute. Kevin Roberts is now the president of the Heritage Foundation. Our current president is Greg Sindelar, who is just at the close of his own first year in stewardship here and is doing a great job. But it's an organization that is, just its mission is simple: defend Texas in every way that Texas requires defending, and that means to us and to me defending that struggle and idea that we talked about, keeping Texas a place of liberty, and also defending the inheritance that we have. So if there's an organization that embodies the pius Aeneas, protecting the future, defending the past, making the best present we can, I like to think it's us, and we are very, very fortunate to be in a state where there is still a majority of the people writ and the people are the ultimate sovereigns and arbiters of these things. It's not us. It's not us and NGOs. It's not us. It's not even really office holders so much. but the people want it, and so that's the work that we do.
I don't know if you, well, I know we talked about it previously, but the interview that Jordan Peterson does with Danielle Smith, who's the premier of Alberta, Canada, and they
Yes.
refer to Alberta as being the Texas of the North. But she had such a comprehensive approach to look. When people say like don't drill, like we know we have to have at minimum bitumen and all these different products that come out of our or what I like to call organic energy supply, but we have this thing, it belongs to the people, this energy source that is extraordinarily powerful, and she's trying to build a comprehensive policy, and I would want here in California where we have a lot of oil, you guys have a lot of oil in Texas, I would want us handling this as opposed to offshoring it to, I don't know. I just don't trust the Iranians to treat people humanely and to be environmentally responsible. But we seem to lose that. Like we want the best of all these worlds. We want to have these gigantic cars, zillions of miles of roads, but we don't want to leverage a resource that belongs to all of us. I had Dr. Stephen running he's a climatologist, and he makes this point. He's like, look, we have all this energy, we need to use it. This is a guy that's like, hey, we got to get control of global warming. We should probably hold carbon at about 400 parts per million for the atmosphere, but we have this energy, we have to use it because it's the best way to reduce for now how we pollute things. So you hear about Danielle's approach to policy and how she wants to realize this asset and safely move it. This does parallel Texas and what you guys have right there in the ground, and just the massive space it takes to process this energy. There's really no better way to run. Look, we need energy. We don't want less energy. We want more energy as a people.
Right.
I'm going to shut up and quit rambling about that, but I think you get what I'm going after.
As a society, so you're a student of military history, so you know what victory disease is, right? I mean, that's you won so much you've forgotten to take the precautions against losing. You've forgotten what losing is like. And so in some cases, you've forgotten what struggle is like. This is what beat the Mexicans at San Jacinto in April 1836. Was they had victory disease, and so they didn't bother to post pickets, and had their camp wiped out by the Texans. One of the great miracles of American history. We as a society, when it comes to energy, we suffer from victory disease. We haven't really, there are obviously many individual cases. I'm not dismissing cases of want in the United States, nor am I of the school that you see a lot of our libertarian friends adhere to, that holds that, well, you have access to an iPhone, therefore you're not truly poor. No, I mean, you can be poor and have a smartphone. It's entirely possible. So society-wide, I think I would say that in terms of energy production, we do suffer from victory disease. We have not had real, even with the oil shocks of 73 and 79, we have not had real genuine shortage that involved, the elderly freezing to death, people bringing their children to warming centers during the winter, all the things that you see in other countries and places where there is real deprivation. We've just never had it. And so as a consequence of never having had it, we embark upon policies exactly like the ones that you're talking about, in which people, out of sometimes virtuous motives, sometimes not, encourage us to kill our own energy industry or diminish our extraction of oil, natural gas resources from the ground, stuff that's ours as a nation. And it's always a battle. It's one of the things that the foundation works on quite a bit, is making sure that we do have that liberty to exploit our energy in prudent and considered ways. But there's forces out there that want to shut it down. A lot of it's wish casting. A lot of the stuff that you see that the Biden administration doing in terms of mandates that all cars are going to be electrical, and they're going to massage your back while you drive by 2050 or something like that. These are aspirational political signaling devices, but unfortunately, they're not just signaling; they have real consequences. And I will tell you this: anytime you see a fuel shortage in the United States of any kind, local, temporary, whatever, just know that it's artificially created. There is enough oil in the ground. There's enough gas in the ground. There's, I don't want to overstate this, but there's basically enough infrastructure. We could use some more by way of refining capacity, but there's enough. There's enough. We're astoundingly rich. The continent is not fully inhabited. We can accommodate many millions more people, maybe even hundreds of millions of more people if we needed to, and not run out of resources. So don't forget the bounty of America as you live here as a citizen and a participant in our story.
I know I've only got you for about 5 more minutes, so I just want to give you the chance to either throw back at me a question or just riff on whatever you want about Texas foundations, policies, Mexico. What do you want to close on?
We haven't really talked about Mexico much. I know it was in the title, which I regret, but I do want the viewers here to be aware of just really in thumbnail, because we only have a few minutes, what the situation in Mexico is like. Obviously, you and I have been to Mexico together twice, once by accident, once on purpose.
Yes.
But the Mexico, which again, just to reiterate, is an ancestral place for me. I knew Mexican-born antecedents of mine, great-grandparents, and in fact, my grandmother, who's still alive, is a native Spanish speaker. So we're not that far away from it. Being in South Texas with the roots that we have. So I love Mexico. Love the culture. Pretty much any aspect of it you can name. Pete knows, because he's probably deleted a bunch of my emails about it. That I'm extremely enthusiastic about modern Mexican folk music. Which is undergoing a renaissance, by the way. So we can do another show on that. But check it out if you haven't done it. But Mexico, the state, Mexico, the polity, is in a state of disintegration, and it's not alone. Most of the Latin American Western Hemisphere is just traveling that road too. At this point, we're in a very dangerous moment in the Western Hemisphere, where almost every power in the hemisphere. Actually, maybe every power in the hemisphere, excepting some Caribbean islands that I'm not aware of, is under the control of a left-wing government, including the United States and definitely Canada. And there's a lot of evil stuff coming out of that. The number one evil thing that we should be aware of south of our border is this process of state breakdown. And I want to be 100% clear. It's not that criminal cartels, organized crime, it's not that they are overthrowing the state. It's that they are merging with the state, becoming part of it, cooperating with it. And a lot of my work here at the foundation involves studying that, understanding it, and trying to formulate policy responses to it. There are good people in Mexico trying to do good things. We do have partners in Mexico. I work with some of them every day. But at the same time, we have to understand that the paradigm that prevailed and that got us NAFTA, for example, in 1994, of a Mexican state with whom you could do business, that was basically had a concurrence of interest with the United States, and that genuinely wanted to cooperate with the U.S. in not every law enforcement task, but a lot of them. All that's gone now, and our policymakers must catch up, because the people paying the price for it now are twofold. They're individuals at the border, which admittedly is a small segment of the U.S. population, but much more consequentially, in a larger sense, it's every American who has ever lost a loved one to fentanyl. Which unfortunately, looking forward 10 years in the future, maybe almost everybody, just given the shocking numbers that are happening. So be aware of that, understand it, and just know that even among those of us who wish Mexico well, and I definitely do, and I want good relations with it, there would be no middle class in my native South Texas without Mexican trade. Nevertheless, must face reality, and we need to demand action from our own executives in office, in governance, to address what is quickly becoming the greatest crisis on the southern border in over 100 years. So how's that for a happy close?
Yeah. Well, I can say this. I love Mariachi Garibaldi, which is a band that plays at Dodger Stadium during games.
Sure.
And it's like a time machine. You just like those horns blow out over the entire stadium. Best sound system in all of baseball. My buddy DJ Severe runs all that stuff. And it's great. The traditional Mexican music, popular. I love all that stuff. I love Mexico just like you. I'm dying to go on a tequila buying run south of Tijuana. So to buy a bunch of tequila for my friends. So I agree. Mexico is a wonderful place. We've got to have a more comprehensive and sane and not left and right careening policy either. Like let's get like a sane going forward policy where we're doing something good and we don't wind up with a Palestinian state on our border that we're dealing with for 1,000 years because they're somehow latch their things on the criminality and the acquisition of land and murder. And oh my gosh, it's just so terrible. So I was trying to stay positive, and then I went over to the to the part that got mad.
Yeah. Look. I mean, Mexico again. Mexico writ large are fantastic, and there's a
Yes.
reason why when we come to the United States, we integrate just fine, which is true. We
Yeah.
do. But Mexico is what happens when you have an elite. Here's a lesson for us in the United States. Mexico is what happens when you have an elite that does not view itself as the steward of the nation. That's true. If the nation is something that's just an extractive resource, then Mexico is what you get. And we should not condescend to them, because in Washington, D.C., we do have a class of people exactly like that. And so our task is to keep them from running everything.
All right. Take off, man. I'll take care. Talk to you later. I'm going to run the credits. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Pete.
Hey, thanks for watching the show. I really appreciate it. Right here, you can subscribe. Please do that. It makes the show grow. Hit that notification bell so you know which incredible guest is coming up next. Down below is the PayPal link. You can put a small subscription in. That is an enormous help. All that money goes right back into the show. And then right up over here are the next episodes you should listen to, curated by yours truly.